Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you, and it's good to be back. We had a wonderful visit to Israel. Look forward to sharing some of that in the weeks ahead. But it was a wonderful, very meaningful trip. A lot of different experiences we had on this visit. What? Oh, I hand that here, right by Abby. There's a bunch. Let me get you. There you go. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. To everyone who's here and everyone who's online. Today is Wednesday. It is the 8th of January. We are in 2025, which is hard to remember as you're writing your checks. It takes always a while to get the right year when we switch like this. And we're getting ready for Parshas Vayechi, the final parsha in Sefer Bereshis. So I want to share a couple of Divrei Torah with you on this week's parsha. Some of these may be familiar, some of these may be new to you. So let's see, let's jump right in. So we know Parshas Vayechi begins that Yosef receives the message that his father has fallen ill. Yaakov is very close to passing, and Yaakov is close to passing. Here you go. Yaakov is close to passing, so Yosef is summoned to come to see him. He brings his children Ephraim and Manasseh, and then a little bit they get blessed, and then a little bit later, Yaakov starts to distribute blessings to all of the Shvatim, to all of the tribes. So we're going to take a look at the blessings that Yehuda received, and that's going to take us for the first part of the shir today. So let's see. There are 5 psukim where Yehuda is blessed. The pasuk says, Yehuda. He turns to his son Yehuda and he says, Ata yaducha achacha. He says, your brothers will acknowledge you. Yadcha ba'oref oivecha. Your hand will be at the nape of your enemies. Yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. And your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. So just you see in here, there is mention about the great warriors that will come from Shevet Yehuda, and also the fact that Malchus, kingship, will come from Shevet Yehuda, and that's what he means, that your fellow Bnei Yisrael are going to bow down to you because of the fact that Malchus, kingship, will come from you. He says further, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, a cub and a grown lion is Yehuda, Miteref Bini Alisa, from the prey, my son, you withdrew. We'll see soon what that might be. This is very cryptic, some of the lines that Yaakov uses. We'll soon see something about that. Hararavatz ka'aryeh, and he says he crouched, he rested like a lion, uchelavi miyakimanu, and like a lion who will rouse him. So Lavi is another name for a lion. We have friends who named their son in Israel Lavi. If you remember also, there was a fighter plane, I believe back in the 80s that Israel was working on. No, it was a plane. Yeah, the Lavi. It was a plane. It never really went far. I think they developed a prototype, but they never started mass producing. Is that what it was? Okay, could very well be. It might also be that it was more worth their while to just, purchase planes from America. I don't know. I don't know what scrapped it, but I remember that was a big deal in the 80s. They were talking about this Lavi, this fighter plane that they were working on. And then it says 10, Lo Yasur Shevet Yehuda, the scepter of rulership, meaning the kingship, should never depart from Shevet Yehuda, meaning that true Malchus kings will always be from Yehuda, which is the reason why Shaul HaMelech, everyone knows what tribe was Shaul from? Binyamin. That's why Shaul was never going to have a dynasty. He was set up to be the first king, but he was never going to have a dynasty because he wasn't from Yehuda. And there's a whole discussion even why was there someone necessary from Binyamin in the first place. But be that as it may, the Lo Yasser Shevet Mi Yehuda, the scepter of rulership will never depart from Yehuda. Mechokek mi ben raglav, nor the students of law from between his feet. Meaning, there's always going to be malchus and there's always going to be scholarship coming from Shevet Yehuda. Ad ki yavo Shiloh v'lo yikas hamim. Until Shiloh comes, and Tim will be a gathering of people. Now, Shiloh here is not referring to the city of Shiloh in the Mishkan, rather it's referring to Mashiach, meaning until Mashiach, meaning the ultimate Mashiach ben David, it's going to be a descendant of Yehuda as well. Yud Aleph 11, Osri Lagefen Iro, he binds his foal to a vine, Ulasreka bini asono, and to a tendril he binds his young donkey. Again, very cryptic, and you'll find a lot of commentaries. There's so much written on all the brachas of Yaakov saying what these are veiled prophecies. It's not just blessings, but they're prophecies. What's he referring to? Kibes bayayin levusho. He launders his garment with wine. Now, again, obviously that's a metaphor because if you want to get your garments clean, wine is not the best agent to wash them in. Uvedama novim suso, and with the blood of grapes, binds his garment. The blood of grapes obviously means is another euphemism for wine. So again, there's a lot of commentary on this pasuk, what exactly that's referring to. Finally, Lili Einayim Miyayin. He says his eyes are red from wine. Now, again, he's not talking about Yehuda being a drunkard, but again, there's obviously this is a metaphor for items. Uleven shinayim echalav, and his teeth are white from all the milk that he drinks. So again, there's a lot of prophecies in these brachos, and there is also a lot of metaphors, and you'll find the commentaries are very rich in trying to flesh all of these brachos out. Some of the shvatim, like Yehuda here, he gets 5 psukim. Asher, I believe, just has 1 pasuk, so it's a little bit more straightforward what he says to some shvatim than others. Okay, what I want to focus on is something very interesting in Rabbeinu Bachya. Rabbeinu Bachya makes an observation here. He's one of our great Rishonim from Spain, and he makes an observation here that I never would have made because my brain just doesn't think this way. I don't look at these 5 psukim and say, okay, are all the letters of the alphabet there? And if not, which ones are missing? It's just not the way my head's programmed. But Rabbeinu Bachya was a very different person, a scholar, a greater scholar than we are. Let's see what he does. So this is in a much longer piece. I'm at the end of that first line where he says v'im. So it's about 6 words before the end of the first line. V'im tistakel b'parsha zu. If you look at this segment of all the brachas, these 5 psukim that are given to Yehuda, b'birchas Yehuda, if you look at this segment of the blessings given to Yehuda, timtza sham, you'll find something very interesting. Kol osios Torah, you'll find all the letters of the Aleph Beis can be found within these 5 psukim. Rishumos, they're all there. Chutz me'os Zayin, except for one. The only letter that's missing is Zayin. Zayin is not there. Zion is just not there. Are we? Oh, here, take this one. I'll use the one on screen. No, don't worry. So he says, Rabbeinu Bachya there says, if you look at those 5 psukim of the brachas of Yehuda, all the letters of the Aleph Beis are there. On the second line, he says, they're all rishumos that can all be found. Chutz me'os Zayin. The one letter that's missing is Zion. So Rabbeinu Bachya wants to say, what's the symbolism of that? What is the Torah getting to? What was Yaakov getting to when he blesses Yehuda with 5 psukim? It's very verbose, yet he couldn't find a way to include the letter Zion in there. What does that mean? The Hatam, so Rabbeinu Bachya suggests, what's the reason why Yaakov Avinu uses all the letters of the Aleph Beis, but he did not use Zion? V'hatam, lefi Malchus Yisrael, because he's talking to Yehuda, who represents the future kingship of the Jewish people. Habam Yehuda, they're all going to descend from Yehuda. Ein Iker Nitzchonon B'Kli Zion. He's saying they're going to be incredibly victorious. They're going to be mighty warriors. But don't be fooled. The wars of Israel are going to be waged very different than the wars of all the other nations. All the other nations, it's going to depend on their weaponry. It's going to depend, do they have the best weaponry? Do they have the newest weaponry? Do they have the finest weaponry? That's true of all the nations of the world. But Bnei Yisrael is lemala min hateva. The Jewish people operate on a higher level, a higher field. They're not operating according to the laws of nature. That's why the letter Zion is missing here. To say that there are nitzachon, or victory that we're going to have, don't ever attribute it to the fact that we had a superior weaponry. Kisharumos, like all the other nations in the world. Ki acherev Yerusha leisav. And it's saying more, it's not to be glorified. Unlike other nations of the world who glorify their warriors and their body counts and all that stuff, that's the world of Esav. That's not the world of Yehuda. That's not the world of Klal Yisrael. Ki acherev Yerusha leisav. The sword, that's a Yerusha. That's the inheritance of Esav. Aval Malchus Yisrael lo b'charvam yarshu aretz. The Jewish kingdom, it wasn't because of the strength of their swords that they inherited the land of Israel. And the reason why we were victorious was not like the other nations of the world, because of the fact that we had superior battlefield techniques and that we had superior weaponry. And it wasn't based on rational law. That cannot be used to explain the victory of Am Yisrael and how we came to possess the land of Israel. He says, "Rak lefi hazuchus va'onesh b'koach elyon yisparach." Our entire rights to victory and how we inherited the land of Israel, how we could hold on to the lands of Israel, is all based on schar and onesh, our merits and our unfortunately sometimes our punishments based on heavenly calculations, based on our conduct. Are we living up to our end of the deal, the covenant that we have with Hashem to observe the Torah on a national basis, not just individuals? And that's why you'll also find Bishmo Shel Yehuda. Look at the name Yehuda, Shamalchus Mimenu, the tribe that the Malchus, the Shevet, that kingship comes from, dynasty comes from. Hashem Amiyuchad Shalem. Look in the word Yehuda. Take out the Daled. What letters are there? A Yud, a Hey, and a Vav, and a Hey. God's name is in the name of Yehuda. And that again is alluding to this fact that it's not through Kli Zayin, it's not through weaponry. And we should never make the mistake of thinking that if all we need is superior firepower and then everything is in our court. We don't work according to the laws of Teva. That's true of other nations or other armies, but we have Hashem, and that's where our true victory comes from. And that's what Yaakov was getting at by leaving out the Zion in these psukim. And he says here, Umalchusam miskaberes umetzlachas, the kingdom of Yehuda, which is Israel, will become strong and will become successful. Vashem hamiyuchad imahem. Only when God is with us. And if we are really doing it, we're living up to our end of the thing, we don't even technically need weapons. Of course, when Klal Yisrael came with Yoshua into Israel, they had weaponry, but that's our hishtadlus. They're holding swords, just so it's not an open miracle. But the real victory was coming through Hashem. Technically speaking, we wouldn't even need those swords. That's what Rabbeinu Bachya suggests why the Zion is missing. In these 5 psukim, very verbose, a very lengthy blessing Yaakov Avinu gives Yehuda, he intentionally left out the Zion to make it clear that Bnei Yisrael is working on a completely different playing field than the rest of the Ummas Ha'olam, the nations of the world. And by leaving that Zion out, he's reminding Klal Yisrael not to fall into the mindset, not to fall into the trap. Other nations have different calculations as far as if they'll be victorious, if they're going to win, if they're going to lose. Klal Yisrael has a different cheshbon, a different calculation. Are we on a national level doing what we're supposed to be doing? He's saying that's what Rabbeinu Bachya is suggesting. That is the message that Yaakov Avinu was sending by leaving out the letter Zion in these 5 psukim. Very, as we said, very verbose, very lengthy, and they're very cryptic, the blessings he gives to Yehuda. But he couldn't have stuck a Zion in there. No, he intentionally left that out to make it clear that that's not what we take pride in, that's not what we glorify, and that's not where our true success is going to come from. Of course, we need to have weaponry. We need to have our hishtadlus. We have to put in our efforts. But ultimately, the real deal breaker is whether or not we're living up to our covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what he points out there. I think all of us could look in some way or another a history of the last just about 80 years of modern day Israel, and you see how much of this plays itself out here. There's just no way to explain. There's no way to explain so many of the victories. Granted, we've suffered so many losses along the way as well, but the victories that are there, you can't just chalk this up to weaponry. You know, when we were in Israel now, one Shabbos, we were there 2 Shabbosos. So the first Shabbos we were with one of my brothers, and he's got two of his kids are in the army now. So one of them was able to come home for Shabbos. Avi was home for Shabbos, and he was exhausted. He was getting some rest, and he has a daughter, my niece Leah Miriam. She's just passed some kind of officer's course. They've figured out that on a number of instructional levels, soldiers listen much better to female instructors. What's that? Yeah. So she took this officer's course. She's basically going to be an instructor. I don't know in what exact specific field, but Layla jokes with her like, "You were always good at bossing people around." She's gonna be giving some kind of instructions. But they've done studies that they pay more attention or something. But be that as it may, so she's doing these officer courses. She couldn't get out that first Shabbos with her was Shabbos Chanukah. And over the course of the Shabbos meal, my brother was telling us that he asked her right before Shabbos, where are you this Shabbos? This doesn't, I guess they must have video called. Doesn't look like your normal place. So she says, no, actually they rotated her and I guess all of her women in her group. There was someplace up north for Shabbos guarding some massive warehouse complex. What's going on? This lightning blitz that took place into Lebanon, Israel has captured this incredible amount of weaponry, unbelievable amount of weaponry. And unlike the stuff that they captured in Gaza, a lot of that stuff was homemade stuff with they just don't trust. It's not stable, being made in Hamas guys' bathtubs and stuff like that. So they don't want to risk it. They don't even want to move that stuff because they don't know if it's stable, if it'll explode. Most of that stuff, they're just exploding where it is because they if it's in tunnels, great, they'll just explode them there. But they just don't want to even transport it. But the stuff that they seized in Lebanon, because they got in there before they could Hezbollah could do anything, they've got it's massive stuff. There's stuff still in the crates from Iran, from Russia, from North Korea. They've got this stuff, incredible amount of weaponry. So some stuff they destroyed there, like the missiles and whatnot, but there's an incredible amount that they hauled out, and it's in these warehouses somewhere in northern Israel. So they must have soldiers, on weekend duties, who are just there guarding these warehouses. So that's where my niece was one with that Shabbos. So I was asking, what are they going to do with all this stuff? They can't put this stuff into use because, again, this is a totally different weapon systems than what Israel uses, and it get in terms of resupply, you can't have people using different weapons because you can't really. So he says a lot of stuff's probably going to get sold. A lot of stuff might get sold to Ukraine, because they're using stuff that's compatible with Soviet stuff. A lot of the stuff gets sold there. We don't know what this stuff is. Maybe some stuff they can put into service, maybe some explosives or something they could use, but supposedly it's an incredible amount of stuff and very sophisticated stuff. But the volume, they're saying the volume is just phenomenal. They're talking about there's going to be these VIP tours to basically just show everybody what was seized up there. They're saying the volume is just insane. But so anyhow, why am I bringing this up? Is again, this is just a recent example, is that you can't say that the reason why Israel has tasted success is always because of its superior manpower, superior firepower, superior, just having more weapons. There's plenty weapons on the other side. There's obviously the God factor that's going on, and we should always find favor in His eyes to help us succeed. But that's what this Rabbeinu Bachya is getting at, is that we're operating on a totally different plane than the other Umas Olam. And by leaving that Zion out in these brachos, that's what Yaakov Avinu was getting at and trying to remind Klal Yisrael. So obviously, of course, there's weapons that are needed, but we should never make the mistake of thinking that's what spells our success or failure. Obviously, we have to do our best, we have to do our ishtadlos, but ultimately, our true success is coming from God. And if we doing what we're supposed to be doing on a national level, we could accomplish the unbelievable things that are just lamala min hateva. And that's what Rabbeinu Bachya suggests. Yaakov Avinu was sending this message to Yehuda, who's going to be the Melech, and that all of Malchus, who's going to be so successful in battle, as you saw in some of these psukim, about him talking about the fierce warrior that Yehuda would be. And look at David HaMelech, what kind of a warrior he was, but he's also reminding him there's no Zion in there. If we have Hashem, then that's going to spell the difference.
See the Tosfos Bracha also noticed it, but all of them forced to notice the Zion missing. Like that's not the first thing I would look.
So the first one I ever saw who noticed this was Rabbeinu Bachya, and we're going to see the Tosefes Bracha in a minute. He picks up on a slightly different deal, but I'm willing to bet you he wouldn't have noticed it if it wasn't for Rabbeinu
So I'm
Bachya.
just saying it's just so unusual.
Very unusual, and my brain doesn't work this way. I don't look at five psukim. Right.
To look and calculate.
I don't look. My brain doesn't work this way. I don't look at five psukim and say, okay, which letters are there and which are not. Rabbeinu Bachya is a rishon. That's just doing.
Why wouldn't he just say and?
Well, because these blessings are filled with metaphors and allusions and cryptic statements, and Rabbeinu Bachya is looking at it and says, "Whoa, isn't that interesting? There's no Zion in there. What is he getting at? What? Well, the word Zion, we're going to see in Tosefes Bracha a little bit more why it might mean that, but Zion always means Kli. Zion always means weapons of war. Kli is utensils. Zion means of fighting, of combat. We're going to see soon. Tosefes Bracha adds a little bit to that. Why specifically the Zion was chosen? We're going to see. Yeah, let's see. Let's go to page 2. So Tosefes Bracha that's the Torah Tamima, Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. So later in life, he wrote more of his thoughts, and they're also in 5 volumes. So I was looking at him this week. We're going to see something else in him soon. Look at this Tosefes Bracha. I thought this is, again, I don't know why he put it on this pasuk, because he's going on, right before Yehuda was the blessings to Shimon and Levi. So I don't know why he put this on the pasuk. same Yisrael. I was talking about how he wants to scatter Shevet Shimon and Levi. He doesn't want them to be united, ganging up together again after what they did with Shechem. So I don't know why the Tosefes Bracha put it on that pasuk. This is the pasuk right before the blessings for Yehuda, because he's about to comment on Yehuda. So again, it could have just been a printing error when he put the Sefer together. He put it on that pasuk, but he's clearly going on Yehuda. He says, Berchasol Yehuda, if you look at all the brachas to Yehuda, Techalkel Chamisha Psukim, it's the next 5 psukim. Uvou behem kol osius aleph beis. And like Rabbeinu Bachia pointed out, you'll find all the letters of aleph beis in there. Levad os hazayin. The one letter that's missing is the zayin. Again, he doesn't quote Rabbeinu Bachia, but I'm sure that's where he got this from, because he seems to be the Rishon that made this famous point. Look at this next paragraph. V'ulai, and perhaps, nirmaz bezel amasha kasav hamekubalim. There's a hint to this in what some of the Kabbalists write. The al kain nimsa b'shem Yehuda, and again, Rabbeinu Bachia himself, we saw it referred to this, that within the name Yehuda, you'll find kol osios mishem havaya. You'll find all 4 letters of God's super special name. The Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, they're all in there. Mishum, what's that alluding to? Shem milcham asav hayurak b'shem hamefarash. That the wars of Israel in the time of David HaMelech, true, they were carrying swords, but the real weapon they were using was God's name. Now, whether that means that they were using God's, holiest names, and that's how their enemies were falling, or if that means they were coming, so to say, as emissaries of God, because they were in the covenant with God, and that's why they were being successful. Hashmatos Hazayin, and that's what Yaakov is getting at, what Rabbeinu Bachia said here, by leaving out the Zayin, laharos, to teach Yehuda, shelo nishtamesh b'kli Zayin. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the reason you're being victorious was totally because of your kli Zayin, because of your weapons of war. Shal zeh mora osa Zayin. That's what the Zayin would refer to. The Zayin, when we see the word Zayin, it refers to weapons of war. Commotion of Arba Parshas Teitze, we see this again come up in Parshas Kiseitze, the Parshas Lo Yeh Kli Gever Al Isha, when it talks about that women shouldn't be wearing men's clothes. Asher Kefiyah Mavur Bekoros Yimei Olam Haya Kli Zayin Chanis. Now he says this comes up according to many discussions. What that seems to be talking about in Parshas Kiseitze, they're talking about that they shouldn't be carrying one of the things that fell under the jurisdiction of Kli Gever. What was male clothing? One thing was, Gesundheit, was carrying a dagger. Again, at that time, that was considered a male item that they would carry. Now look what he says. He points something out. This might get to what Abby was asking. Why, of all the words you could use to describe weaponry, why would you use the word Zion? Look what he says here. A Zion is a chanis. A chanis is a dagger. He goes, V'hu betmunas, O Zion. If you look at it, look how he does that. Yeah, he goes, the dagger is actually shaped like a Zion. Look, there's the what is that called? The hilt, that guards the hand, the cross piece. That's the hilt, I think, right? That's what that's called. The part that comes across, that's like the top of the Zion. Baal Shemo Nikru Kli Krev Melchama. He goes, that's actually why they call the Kli Zion, because it actually, a dagger looks like the letter Zion. It's got that hilt, it's got the cross piece and the handle on top, and then the part that you would stab with. I thought that's an interesting idea. Sometimes you see ideas in some Sfarim as to how different words in Hebrew got their name. I thought that's very interesting. He's saying, look at the letter itself. Of all the letters in alphabet, that's why that becomes known as a Kli Zayin. I thought that's interesting. I want to share with you on this theme. I saw this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought this was fascinating. I saw this before Hanukkah, and I thought of this because we say in Al Hanisim, if you look back at when we're talking about the battles of the Maccabeim, the Hashmonaim, it says Rabim Ba'ad Ma'atim, Itzmeim Ba'ad Tahorim, that they had this incredible victory, which they were going against the mightiest army in the world. Here were some Kohanim who they weren't, no one's writing about them that they were these brilliant military, tacticians, and they did not have the latest weaponry, and they were going against the mightiest empire in the world at that time, which was the Syrian Greeks. So we say that in Al Hanisim all the time, yet Hashem was with them. So that's like a classic example of what Bnei Yisrael can accomplish when they're on the side of Hashem. So I saw this before Hanukkah. This isn't a history book. I believe it's 3 volumes. It was written by an Aaron Sorsky. I can't tell you, I didn't look up about him as an author who he was, but this was written decades ago. And the name of this work, it was a 3-volume work, was called Marbitze Torah Umusar. So it was basically those who taught Torah and Musar, ethical living, because B'yeshivas Nusach Lita, this is talking about, so to say, that golden age of the Lithuanian yeshivas. Mitkufas Volozhin, from the starting of the Volozhin Yeshiva, that was by Rav Chaim Volozhin, a student of Vilna Gaon, Adi Meinu, until today. So I think this was post-Holocaust. So he's writing this in the 1950s or so. That he's doing. It was a 3-volume historical work about the golden age of the Lithuanian yeshivas. It's weird to say golden age because most of them were dirt poor. So it's funny to say that, but it was golden in terms of, I guess, its spiritual content. So this is in volume 1. He's got a very nice section on Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was also known as Rav Chaim Brisker. So after he left Volozhin, when Volozhin closed, so he's in the town of Brisk as the Rav of Brisk, but also he has a yeshiva there. So this is, I had seen this quoted elsewhere, but this seems to be the original source. So I found it. I was very happy I found it. Look at this incident. He says here, Be'echad hayamim, again, this is after Rav Chaim Brisker, he's serving as a Rav of Brisk. Be'echad hayamim, there was a point of time, Ne'ercha bebrisk, a traveling troupe like of actors, Yiddish theater comes through the town of Brisk. Mitam Chug Chiloni, there was a secular group, Hatzaga Hitolit, and they were a group of actors. So basically, it was like not a circus, a traveling theater group that came through town to set up one of these Yiddish theater groups. Now, again, back then there was a war that was being waged in the secular movement, trying to pull youth away from religion, and a lot of the Yiddish theater was used as a tool in that regards, mocking tradition, mocking Torah observance, and that was part and parcel. When people would talk about the Yiddish theater, it was like, just because it was in Yiddish, we sometimes make the mistake of thinking, okay, if something's Yiddish, it's traditional. There was a very, very strong secular Yiddish movement. My dad told me this. He says it's so funny to think about this now, but he says growing up, he grew up in Brownsville. My dad was born in 1932, so there was in Brownsville at that point in New York. Brownsville was a really, really strong, active Jewish community, but he had all types and stripes. He says he remembers on Friday night, especially when it was a long Friday night, you'd go out for a walk because everyone wanted to be outside their apartments, and on every street corner, someone would be preaching on a soapbox about something else. You had the socialist on one corner, you had the communist on another corner, you had the Zionist, then you had the Bundist, and then you had the Yiddishist. And he says he remembers there was Yiddish theaters. Like his older sisters once took him to watch Shakespeare in Yiddish. He thought it was the most bizarre thing. Like, if I watch Shakespeare, why am I going watching it in Yiddish? But again, it was once a big deal, this like Yiddish movement and stuff. So he says there was a time where this Yiddish theater comes through Brisk, and what was their performance? Alanose was on the topic Tzava Ivri. They were going to do a comedy skit, like a Saturday Night Live comedy skit. They were going to mock the Torah's concept of the Jewish army. Lifnei Tzeis Hatzava. So what did they do? So they have on stage, they line everyone up like they've got, a whole lot of people up on the stage. And before they're about to march into battle, Hechriza Mifaked, the officer, whoever it is, the commander in charge, he makes the following announcement. Mia Isha Sherbana Bayis Chadash. Who here has built a brand new house, v'lo chancho, and has not inaugurated it? Yelech v'yashuv lebeso. These are the psukim that are in Sefer Devarim. He says, go home and go back to your house, panya musbel milchama, because maybe you'll die in war, b'ishasher yichanchenu, and someone else will do it. So the Torah says we want someone like that to go home because we're nervous that they're going to have very low morale, and if they're having low morale, it's gonna rub off on everyone else around them. We want them to go home. The Torah says this, so that's what happens on the stage. And what happens? Miyad kamu elaf chayalim. So obviously they didn't have 1,000 people on stage, but they probably had someone holding a placard that says, I represent, 1,000 troops, whatever it is. So 1,000 troops exit the stage. And they leave. They're not going to go into the battle with the others. Mifaked Sheni, a second commander gets up. Kamvodia, and he makes the following proclamation. Who here has planted a vineyard and has not yet inaugurated it? Go home. Because maybe you'll die and someone else will inaugurate it. And you're going to be all demoralized thinking about that, and that'll rub off on others, so go home. Another 2,000 people leave the stage. Again, probably holding placards saying we're 2,000. Acharav him hitz matach mefaked shlishi. A third commander gets up and calls out, Mia yishasher eras isha. Who here has gotten betrothed to a young lady, v'lo lakha, and has not consummated the marriage? Yelech v'yashuv lebeso. Go home. Pen yamus b'milchama v'yishasher yikachero. Because maybe you'll die and someone else will take her, and you'll be demoralized thinking about this will rub off on others. Miyad yisramu oda paimish. Another 2,000 left the stage. Uvishtikas ilaim azvu es makom ruchuzam. So they started the stage pack with soldiers, and now because they're following Torah law, there's fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer people left. Miyad Yisro Memuoro oh, I'm sorry, just read that. Bamafaked Ravi, a fourth commander comes up, and he commands, he announces, Miyaish Hayarei Varach Levav. Who here is feeling scared? Who here is nervous about the averos that they may have done? Yelech v'yashuv lebeso. Also, go home. Lo yimases levav echav kavavo. Because we don't want him to melt anyone else's heart. Don't want him to demoralize anyone else. And again, these are four commands that the pasuk tells us that the Kohen who was mashuch lemilchama, he would make these announcements. So it says, "Hitzdiu od shloshes alapim chayolim v'ochulam." Another 3,000 left. So again, you started off. He's saying this is the comedy routine, the skit that they're doing is that someone makes announcements, and more people leave the stage. Finally, al abima on the stage, nisharu rak shnaim. There are only from started off a packed stage. There's only two left. And who are they? Two old men. Hagon Mivilna, he's got a big placard on his neck saying, I'm the Vilna Gaon, and also Bala Shagas Aryeh. That was another very famous Achron around the time of the Vilna Gaon. He wrote a sefer called the Shagas Aryeh. So he says, you have these two elderly sages. They're the only ones left on the stage because they didn't build a house, they didn't plant the vineyard, they didn't marry a new wife, and they're not scared. So there's just these two older Zakanim who are left on stage. And what do? Hischilu Shneim b'maso matan shalalacha. They start having a halachic argument. Mi kodem lami, who should precede who? B'mitzvah zu shamachama ba'oyev. We're about to perform this mitzvah of going to war against our enemies. Who should step first? Should me? Do you have more zechusim than me? So the place is roaring with laughter. This is what's going on. They're mocking. This is the Torah's idea of what a Jewish army is going to look like and a war is going to look like. So I guess someone comes back to report to Reb Chaim Brisker, who wasn't at the play, he was in the base medrash, and someone says, can you believe this? There they are, they're mocking our Torah. They have this heretical play, this theater group that they came through, and that's what they did. And they're reporting this to Reb Chaim. So he says, Reb Chaim. He listens a bit, and here's how he responds. Sadku atzach kanim. They were 100% right. Everything they just put on, that whole play, 100% right. That's what the Torah describes. Aval shakhu lasiv. They forgot to add one very important detail. Shedavka shnei zakenim halalu nitzchu b'maracha. That those two elderly men who were left on stage, they won. You forgot that detail. He says there they were victorious. Why? Because Hashem was with them. Exactly. That's what it says. Avram goes into the battle. There was the 4 kings, there was the 5 kings, and then Avram and Eliezer. Right. According to the Medrash, it was just the 2 of them. That was it. So that's what Rav Chaim's reaction was. It's like, everyone's all upset. Could you believe this? The mockery. So he's thinking, he goes, yeah, that's pretty much what the Torah describes, but they just left out a detail. Those 2 elderly people, they won. That's what he says there. I thought it was such a good angle on it. There's this, I'm not going to argue with them. That's, again, they didn't have good intentions when they were doing their play, but yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. That's what the Torah tells us is going to happen. But again, I think this feeds right into what Rabbeinu Bachya is saying. Rabbeinu Bachya is saying is, again, by Yaakov Avinu leaving out the Zion with all of the letters that he used, he left out the Zion. He's reminding us is that the wars that Klal Yisrael were going to fight, that they were going to wage, if we were really doing what we're supposed to be doing, they're Lamala Min HaTeva. We're going to carry swords, we'll have armaments and whatnot. We have to do our full hishtadlus, but with God on our side, anything is possible. And that's what Yaakov was sending a message to Yehuda when he specifically left out that Zion. I'd add also another point too, is that we don't glorify, when we were there just now, and I'll talk more about this in the coming weeks. There's no way to avoid what's going on in Israel. There's no way. Everywhere you go, there are memorials up to the soldiers who have fallen. There are stickers. That's a big thing now. People have made almost like bumper stickers of their loved ones with a quote that they had, like some very, very powerful quotes, poetic quotes, how much they care about the people, how much they care about Am Yisrael, the Jewish land, all this. Everywhere you go, you see this. You can't forget it. But you never see a glorification of, you would think back about some of these statues you've seen of mighty Greek warriors, showing off their physique with a spear. It's smiling, happy faces that they're saying, these are someone we loved and that we lost. No one's glorifying this idea of, bragging about body counts and well, how many people they killed. No one's doing that. They're not glorifying war like this. It's something that's necessary. They're defending Am Yisrael, but no one's glorifying it. And I think that's also part of this by leaving out that Zion, saying this isn't something that it's necessary, but it's not something that we see as that we're glorifying. That's there. We found this too one thing that we did on this trip was, we had been talking for a very long time that, on this trip we were going to try to visit Har Herzl. That's again, there's a lot of dignitaries who are buried there, but there's a whole section that's for Israel's fallen fighters, and we were talking about visiting that. And then there was a funeral that was taking place. It was on Tuesday. It was Rosh Chodesh, and there was a funeral. There was a young man from Beitar Illit, from a very religious Sephardic family who had fallen in battle, and the funeral was taking place. And it was terrible weather. It was really cold and foggy, and they were nervous that there weren't going to be people coming out there. So we made a point that we were going to be there. So we had to leave at a certain point. We caught most of that funeral there, and it's just shocking. There's an entire section. They're not even finished making that section yet. You could see the stones by the floor. It's brand new. It's like a whole section of a mountain that's been added of graves. All you looking at the dates on this is all within the last year and a half. I'd never been to a military funeral of someone who had died fallen in combat, and there it was. It was very, very emotional. It was very powerful moment. The Sephardic chief rabbi, previous one, Shlomo Amar, was there. He spoke beautifully. Current one is, I think, Rav David Yosef is his name. He spoke beautifully, and it was a powerful experience. But again, around us, there are so many memorials to soldiers who have fallen in the last year or so. But again, there's nothing there glorifying war, glorifying combat. It's very solemn memorials to them. I think that also comes to this. It's necessary, but we don't glorify this there. All right, I want to share one more idea. One more idea here is, again, going still on the brachas of Yehuda. And if you look on page 3, actually, let's just look at the pasuk one more time. Back on page 1, look at pasuk test 9. Yaakov Avinu says to Yehuda, Gur Aryeh Yehuda. He says, you're a cub and a grown lion. Miteref bani Alisa. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. Get very cryptic. And it says, Karyeh kolavi miyukamenu. He crouched, rested like a lion, and like a lion who will rouse him. That's a very cryptic pasuk. Let's see what Rashi says to explain that pasuk. We're going back to page 3. So Rashi says, miteref. What does it mean, miteref? That from the prey? He says, Mimasha charashticha, because I had a slight suspicion about you, Yehuda, b'tarof taraf Yosef. Because remember, that was, what did Yaakov declare when they showed him the bloodied, multicolored coat? He says, they asked, is this your son's coat? And he says, yes, that's my son's coat, tarof taraf b'ni Yosef. My son Yosef has been torn up by a wild animal. So here, isn't it interesting? He says, miteref b'ni Alisa. So Rashi's saying, this is an allusion, saying, Yaakov says, harboring, in the back of my mind, I always harbored some suspicion that you had been involved in killing Yosef. When that bloody coat came back, I thought you would have may have had something to do here, that I had originally said, tarof taraf Yosef chayrachla. So a wild animal eating him up. V'zeu Yehuda shenim shel aryeh. He goes, in the back of my mind, I was suspicious that Yehuda, you had something to do with this, because again, you were always compared to a lion. That's what it meant, chayra. And he says, I had always suspected you had something to do with that. Next Rashi, B'ni Alisa, my son, you withdrew. He says, Silakta esatzmacha. He says, you actually separated yourself. You withdrew from the other brothers. Vamarta, and you were the one who said, Ma betza, what's to be gained by leaving him to die? Let's sell him. In other words, you didn't want to leave him in that pit. Reuven had said, throw him in the pit. And Reuven's real intention was to bring him home to his dad. And Yehuda didn't know that. They thought he was going to just leave him in the pit. He's going to starve to death, die there. Yehuda said, why should we leave him to die there? Let's sell him. So he says, he says, B'ni Alisa, silakta satzmacha, you separated yourself from the other brothers who would have been content leaving him there to die. But Martin, you were the one who suggested, Ma betza, what are we going to gain from this? Let's sell him. And by doing that, you were saving his life. V'chein barigas Tamar shoda, and also when you had the opportunity after Tamar had been sentenced to death, when she admitted what had happened, and you were the one who had fathered her kids, you said, "Sad kami many, she's more righteous than me." Leficha kara ravatz b'mei shlomo ish tachas gavna. So that's what he's saying. He says, "B'ni Elisa, you withdrew. In other words, you did something different than others would have done. In other words, you clearly did something different. But in the case of Yosef, you were the one who suggested, let's not let him die, let's sell him. And also when you chose to be embarrassed in that whole incident with Tamar rather than have her executed. So it was Elisa. You withdrew. You almost had an aliyah, more than just you withdrew, but you actually raised yourself." That's what he says about Yehuda. That's how Rashi is learning this based on the Medrash. So we're going to see the Tosefet's bracha that's going to say he doesn't think that's the best way to learn those psukim. Let's see what he does. The bottom of page 3, the Tosefet's bracha, Gur Aryeh Yehuda. So he says, you know what, just to save time, let me speak out the first paragraph outside. The first paragraph, he says, Rashi's suggestion seems it's a stretch because we're saying, number one, he really suspected Yehuda. And what does that mean? He really suspected. We don't really find anywhere written in the Torah that he treated him with suspicion. And number two, all of these brachos really seem to be alluding to the future. And now all of a sudden, the way Rashi is explaining this based on the Medrash is that it's just basically he's praising Yehuda for what he did in the past. So he's saying, I think there's a better way to learn this. That's what Tosefet's bracha is saying. With all due respect, I have another approach to learn these psukim. So let's see the second and third paragraph. So you see the second paragraph begins, Velule perish Rashi. Were it not for what Rashi said, this is what I would suggest. Hayisi Omer, I would suggest as follows. That it is talking about the future. This is a pasuk where he's not praising Yehuda for what he's done in the past, but it's a cryptic prophecy about the future. And that's really what we said all of these psukim are, is that Yaakov's intent here was he says that I want to, remember he says, gather around, I want to tell you what's going to be. I want to tell you about the future. Next paragraph. Who was the first king of Israel? It was Shaul HaMelech. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. After he was pushed off, the kingdom was pushed off of him. David. That's when David takes over. Shumi Shevet Yehuda. David comes from Yehuda. I know this clearly at the end of Megillas Rus when it tells us David's lineage. We know that he's from the tribe of Yehuda. It says Ela told us Peretz. Peretz was Yehuda's son from Tamar. So it says who was Peretz ben Yehuda, the son of Yehuda? Peretz Holid. He gave birth to A, B, C. Ervi Yishai Holidus David. So we know that clearly that David is a descendant of Yehuda. And how do I know that Shaul HaMelech is from Binyamin? L'shem Binyamin, Mevur Shmuel Aleph. The pasuk tells us that straight out in Shmuel Aleph that Shaul was from Binyamin. V'sibas dachyo shel Shaul mimlucha. Let's remind ourselves. What's the reason why Shmuel told himself that he was going to be pushed away from kingship? Haya tarfo berechush Amalek. Because when he went to war against Amalek, he chose to let all their animals live because he wanted to sacrifice them in the Mishkan. So Tarfo could mean that he was grabbing. He seized the rechush, the wealth of Amalek. Shalakach mishalo v'lo echrimam. He didn't destroy it like he was commanded to do. K'mavor barucha binyan zeh b'shmuel aleph. You find that straight out in Shmuel aleph. V'ragaz alav Hashem. Hashem was upset at Shaul for this. V'edichu melucha. Pushed him away from the kingship. Umasra David, and that's why it was given to David. So now he's saying v'zehu shamar Yaakov kan. I think that's what's going on in this pasuk of Gur Aryeh Yehuda Miteref B'ni Elisa. He's saying that's what it is. He's giving a nevuah. What's going to happen in the future? He says Zehu Shamar Yaakov Kan. Beruach nevuah lasid. He's prophesying about the future. Miteref B'ni. He's saying about Yehuda. You are going to step in Miteref B'ni because of the seizure of my son, meaning because my son seized. What is that referring to? That's Shaul. Shaul abami Binyamin. Shaul came from Binyamin. Besibas tarfo shalo. The whole reason why he lost the melucha, why did he lose the kingship? Because teref, he seized the assets of Amalek. Baloshim teref hutzeda. The expression teref means to hunt, to trap. Kamo teref nasan le'reyav. It says in Tehillim that Hashem gives that which he trapped, he gives to his loved ones. So to those who fear him. So that's what he's saying. He's saying miteref bani Elisa. He's praising Yehuda. You in the future, your destiny is you are going to step in Miteraf Beni, when one of my children, who is Shaul, comes from Binyamin, when he makes the sin of Teref, seizing the assets of Amalek, that's when he is going to exit the stage, and that's when you, Yehuda, are going to step up to be the Melech. That's what he says. Miteraf Zeh Alisa Ata. And again, Alisa doesn't just mean you separate yourself. What is an Aliyah? Aliyah's going up. That's what he's saying. Your ultimate rise, Yehuda. When are you going to rise to that destiny of Melech? That's miteref beni, when my son, who's from Binyamin, meaning Shaul, is going to sin by seizing the assets of Amalek. That's Alisa. That's when you will have your Aliyah. That's when you will rise and become the Malchuser. Klomar, David Shiyatzim Mimcha. He's saying David, who's your descendant from Yehuda, that's when he's going to become the Melech, and all of Malchus David base will be created. Alisa Atal Melucha. That's when he will have his that Aliyah. That's when he will rise up and he will become the Melech. So it's a totally different. It's a very nice suggestion. And again, he's not being disrespectful of Rashi. He's saying, Lule, if it wasn't for Rashi, this is what I'd suggest here. But what compelled him to do this was, again, we don't find anywhere in the Torah that Yehuda was treated by Yaakov with some kind of suspicion. In other words, here Rashi is quoting the Medrash saying, I always suspected you were up to something here. But we don't find, in all those years, we don't find Yaakov ever berating Yehuda, saying, what did you do? Tell me, fess up, what did you do? So we don't find any suspicion there. And also, so many of these brachas are alluding to future events, whereas the way Rashi was learning it according to Medrash, he's just basically praising him for what he's done in the past. So what the Tosefes bracha is saying, no, you don't have to get onto this whole area that Yaakov suspected Yehuda. And I do have a way to learn it, that he is prophesizing cryptically about the future. And that's what he's saying to Yehuda. He's telling him, Yehuda, when will your time come? Gur Aryeh Yehuda, you're crouching, you're a grown lion, and you are crouching, but when will you be risen? When will you rouse? When will you, Alisa, when will you not just separate yourself, but when will you rise to the scene? That's miteref beni. When my other son, meaning Shaul, who's come from Binyamin, when he gets caught up in teref, seizing assets that aren't his, that's when you will have your rise, and that's when the malchus will come your way. But it's just a very interesting way to look at that pasuk, very different way than the way Rashi was learning it according to the Medrash. But there's deep meaning to that. All right, so be that as it may, we had a chance to look at several Divrei Torah on this week's parsha. I hope, even though this just stayed within the world of Yehuda, there's so much here, and I hope this contributed some way to adding to our appreciation of the parsha this week. It is good to be back. I'm going to just stop that recording.